participants as well. Our speaker, George Sebastiano, international ICT speaker, and we have Nasrat Khalid is an ICT innovation activist, and they are both will be present online. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just before starting the session with our panelists here, I would like just to give a brief introduction about the session itself and how we look into the data and how we say that the data is the new oil or using it for the digital economy. Actually, when I was preparing for this, I started to look into something globally, then I narrow it down to regional, then I narrow it more down and down until I get to the personal. So I start thinking about it. I said, how come is the data is being that much valuable and have sort of a financial when we say data is the new oil? Look into ourselves, each of us, each individual of us. When we start at the late days that we are registering for an email account. So we start just putting our first, second name, what profession, and which country we are, and so on and so forth. So this have been eventually being taking more and more, and then we start giving addresses when we are doing like a shipment. We start giving credit cards also, although we said it's let's say encrypted, tokenized in different technical terms, and so on and so forth. So the data that we were sharing from day to day is being more and more. And if we look into how why Facebook have bought WhatsApp with that 19 billion, I believe, what was in WhatsApp? And even there was no ads within WhatsApp, but what was the value of WhatsApp when Facebook bought that one? This is things that we need to look into. One more thing is, like previously when we were giving our finger scans, where we were doing this, maybe to the CIA intelligence within each of our countries, to the interior intelligence within the countries, and today is where we are putting these finger scans. Everywhere. iPhone, Samsung Galaxy, they have, I believe, they have the highest database, volume of database of our identity. It's not about even the finger scan right now, it's the face recognition. So previously we are too much hesitate to give such information to even an official entity. Right now, within these technologies of the telephone providers or companies like iPhone and Samsung and all these smart devices, they said you can access your device by your smart. So we are allowing such data to all of them. Not to go more into that, I would like to start our session right now with Mr. Bahir Asmat to give us their view from an ICANN perspective and how is the data is being looked into. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. So basically, as I said, ICANN's role is very limited to the Internet's technical identifiers, namely the names and the numbers, and all the work we do, whether on the technical part or the policy part, all related to this mandate. So I'm at ICANN, I'm responsible for engagement efforts in Middle East and North Africa. This is a region of 26 countries, covering 22 Arab nations plus Turkey, Iran, Pakistan and Afghanistan. It's a population of about 700 million people, almost half of which is yet to come online. So when we started looking at the domain name ecosystem in the region 3 years ago, we were asked to conduct a sort of market study to get better view on how the domain name market looks like across the region. And of course, since ICANN, as an organization, is not the right organization to conduct such research, we commissioned this research or this study via URID. This is the registry for .eu, and they have a long experience in this area. And the research was published in early 2016, so it's almost like 18 months old now. But some of the key findings of this research or study included some figures that might, put things into perspective a little bit. So the study found that across the region, or the region has less than 1% of the global domains. So globally, at the time, there was something like 250 million domain names registered, both under GTLDs, generic names, ComNet, org, and so forth, and country codes like EG, UK, and so forth. So the share of the region in this space is about 1%. Although, the same region also shares maybe 3%, 3 to 5% of the global internet users. The study also examined the top websites that are used or accessed within the region through Alexa.com and found that among the 500 top websites accessed in the region, only 5% are hosted within the region. Means that, people, whether individuals or organizations, prefer to host their content outside the region, or they, prefer to access content that, is originated from outside the region, which, alludes to the fact of the lack of local content being generated within the region. The study also found that a majority of the internet users in the region prefer to access the internet in their local language. About 70% or more of the internet users do prefer to access the internet and to use the internet in their local language, be it Arabic for the Arab nations, or Turkish in the case of Turkey, or Farsi in Iran, or Urdu and other languages used in Pakistan and Afghanistan. The study also noted the slow uptake of internationalized domain names. These are domain names in different scripts other than the ASCII scripts. So those domains have existed for almost 7 years now, but the uptake has been quite slow. And the study also noted the strong correlation between availability of local hosting services and occurrence of local language content. So the more options for local hosting by local companies, the more local content that is generated from within the region. And two key conclusions that came in the same study. One was about domain names and the fact that domain names do not exist in a vacuum, means that we should not expect domain names or domain industry to grow while the ecosystem itself lacks some key elements. And the other key finding was that it's important to expand local language services and local language content in order to help not only those who use the internet today to access the internet in their local language, but also to attract those who are yet to come online. So that was a study that was conducted 2 years ago, and building on this study, a few months ago we continued our effort to further explore this ecosystem, and we commissioned another brief report that looked more at the larger ecosystem, a little bit outside the narrow area of domains, to explore the different elements of this ecosystem, be it content, be it hosting services, policies, and so forth. And this report was published in October this year, a couple of months ago. It's available online. All the reports are available online. And the purpose was to explore the digital economy landscape in the region, again talking about Middle East and North Africa, including Turkey, and consider elements that would establish an effective digital ecosystem. Again, two key findings in this report were that the use of digital technologies is growing quickly across the region, primarily driven by use of technologies like smartphones, social media, and so forth. And the second finding was that the digital transformation, talking about digital economy and digital transformation, it requires much more than the provision of digital infrastructure. So the study noted that while the connectivity and access is a very important metric, yet it's a very poor metric, because it's important to have access and to have means to get access to the internet, but without meaningful and relevant content and services, people will be less tempted to get access or to seek better access to the internet. The study has further zoomed into four key areas of the ecosystem and noted that further work is required in those areas, and that was again based also on other experience from countries that have already taken a longer path towards digital transformation, etc. So one area, of course, is the infrastructure and access, and the need for, not only to have broadband plans, but also to have good action plans that would put, the strategic planning into action. And under also the infrastructure part, the study noted the lack of the internet exchange points in many countries in the region, and noted that even in some countries there are IXPs, but they're not functioning as, IXPs should be functioning. I'll just make it short, and then we'll be happy to take questions. Moving on to the second area. Second area was about making content more relevant to the local community, how to make online services, be it government services or business-related services, commerce, e-banking, etc., how to make those services more available and more relevant to end users. The third area was about building digital skills, which is, of course, very important. But it did not only examine the, normal kind of, capacity development in terms of training and professional kind of programs, but it also tackled the issue of having the skills embedded into the education system, whether basic skills or even some of the entrepreneurial skills as well. The last area was about the policy and regulatory frameworks and the importance of having clear, transparent processes and policies to encourage investments, to encourage competition and to stimulate competition, and also to promote, some of the basic principles like free flow of information across borders, and also making policies regarding the role of ISPs and intermediaries in relation to content clearer and more transparent. One final yet an important remark that came in the same report is that a holistic approach is important in tackling all these areas. So it's not enough to tackle one of those areas to say, okay, we're going to focus on the infrastructure part and leave, policies and regulations. It's important to take a holistic approach in order to reach the desired outcomes and desired results. So I'm going to stop there and happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bahar. We'll keep the question and answer until the end of the session, and we'll reserve around 20 to 30 minutes for all the Q&As. Thanks a lot, Bahir. It's a very fruitful report. I have gone through that, and I will advise you to go through it. And there is a very much important report as well that have been done through the ISOC, Global ISOC. It's about the digital economy in Middle East, and I think this booklet is available on their stands down here. Next, we'll go with Dr. Walid Saqaf from an academic point of view and perspective to give us more about the digital economy, and he's very much specialized in the blockchains and the others. Floors are yours, Dr. Walid.
Thank you, Ali, my friend Ali. First of all, let me start by saying that I'm giving you a perspective from an academic point of view. That means that knowledge is rather important to underline here. And if we do not know what data is, then how can we proceed? So we need to understand where we are at in this time in history and why it is important to reflect on the power of data. Decades ago, data as we know it today was almost non-existent. What used to happen is that employees in a company would come together and then they file ledgers and write down what employees did, how many products, for example, they sold, etc. And this was on paper. And that was extremely difficult to analyze because you would have a person sitting there trying to do statistics on paper and adding and summing and doing all these forms of manually. And that would have been very tedious. But over time, users started to get generated automatically. It means that machines, with the introduction of computers, then it was possible to store data electronically and have this data aggregated, statistically analyzed. And so without having manually trying to do the analysis, now you are able to let computers do it for you. That was the second stage, but the third stage was rather more interesting. It's because machines themselves are the ones that generate the data. It's not only humans that put in the data. For example, traffic lights. How many times traffic lights get, let's say, offline, get malfunctioning? How many cars pass through particular bridges or particular zones? How airplanes and traffic control, all this data is being collected dynamically, and it's generated by machines. The irony here is that machines themselves will have to calculate their own data themselves, and that's where we are at today. It's the Internet of Things era, and it reflects a rather amazing and ironic stage at our history where we as human beings will be the minority. We will be producing the minority of data, and much of the majority of data will be produced by machines. Within this, where is the Middle East? How far have we come in understanding the power of data, and how much of the data are we analyzing, and how much of it is being generated from the region? The problem is that most of the Middle Eastern other users or institutions are producing and delivering data to other non-Middle Eastern entities to analyze. And if you consider, for example, massive organizations such as Google or Facebook, they are making much of the data coming from the Middle East. But they're doing it for advertising purposes, they're doing it to generate more income, more revenues, and then selling it back to us so that we pay again to those companies. So this is not sustainable for the Middle Eastern economy. It's sustainable for the other non-Middle Eastern economies. And so the various results that my friend Bahir had mentioned are a very good indicator that what we need to do is to develop our own mechanism of using this data, to develop our own ways of leveraging it to serve our economies. One way of doing it is obviously through access, as referred to earlier, but I'd like to underline the power of human resources. Without proper education, without proper training, without understanding of what the value of knowledge is in terms of dealing with data, it will be purely impractical, and we would not expect much progress. In that respect, Internet governance comes at the very forefront. If governments, if organizations, if civil society and business work together in ensuring that policies are in place to have data education in schools, at universities, being part and parcel of what is being taught, then we are going to miss a lot, because the future is not only a matter of understanding how data will be used and generated, but it's also understanding how new technologies are being developed to leverage data or to generate data. And this is where, as Ali mentioned, I'm involved in areas such as blockchain technology, which is taking the world by storm nowadays. You may have heard about cryptocurrencies, about Bitcoin. So the idea behind this, sometimes you would think this is a pure economic concept. Okay, it's mainly trading and doing purchasing and buying online and transmitting. But if you think of it, blockchains are basically databases. They are about data. Again, we come back to the point of data and how it is powerful. So just today we have seen the numbers, and the market capital of cryptocurrencies has almost reached $600 billion US. And this is an economy on its own. And so the Arab world, as unfortunately in the Middle East region, has not yet caught on to this understanding. And why is it? It's not because there is no interest. It's because the people who have the ability to generate the technology and understand it are not based in the Middle East. And it's the lack of education, the lack of commitment to pursue knowledge that's causing this dilemma. So I'd say that this is a very good let's say, critical point in our history to realize what we are missing and introduce new mindsets, have a paradigm shift and thinking of why data is important. At the Södertörn University in Stockholm, where I teach, the first thing I do often is give numbers. I often give, the first number I give is 44 zettabytes. I tell them, what is 44 zettabytes? And then students would actually be amused. I mean, what is a zettabyte? I tell them it's 10 to the power of 21. So it's 21 zeros next to the 1. And then that would be 44 next of that. And I tell them this is basically the number of bytes that would be generated yearly by 2020. And so if you think of it, that this is going to overwhelm anything we think of or thought of in the past or the future, and it will be generated and dealt with by over 50 billion machines around us. So if we are not ready, then we will be left behind. We'll continue to be consumers. And so I keep giving them and allowing them to be more motivated, understanding the power of data and how to use it. And the next stage would basically empower them with the education and tools. And that cannot happen unless there is will. There is will by governments, by institutions, and by society and business at large. So, I mean, how to do this is still a second step forward, but at least if we have the commitment, then we can move forward. And I'd like to keep the rest for the discussions later on. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Walid, and looking for the next, because the discussion of that is the more important to know about all of the best usage of the data. Moving next, Ms. Lisa Four. We said it's very much important to mix up the Middle East experience with even the European experience and to understand more about how is the data is being handled and taken care of. Floors are yours.
Well, thank you very much. I would take it both from an infrastructure perspective, because I think infrastructure is key when we talk about data. But also, of course, I'll talk a bit about our knowledge of data and how it's used in Europe. I would like to start with a few numbers, because I think it's interesting to see where we are in the Middle East and the North African region. And if we look at the latest numbers from Gsma, or the Mobile Worldwide Association, so these are not ethnos numbers, they say there are 365 million unique subscribers. And this is actually accounting for 63% of the population. So we're still not up to fully covered of everyone having a mobile subscription. But if you look at the data traffic right now, per month, per active smartphone, it's 1.8 gigabit in 2016. And there is an expectation of actually this growing to 13 in in 2022. This is numbers from Ericsson. This is expectations, of course, but it actually tells a bit about the explosion in use of data on the mobile phone that we will experience over the next couple of years. And of course, more use of mobiles will actually increase the data all over the region. We know some of our members are actually working very closely with Google, like Orange are having a project where they're trying to actually push subscriptions for the young people who actually look into using more data, and they try to get a tariff and a subscription that's actually set to more use of data than the speak. So it's interesting to see how you can hopefully push and actually tailor the subscription so there is a more use of communication. From the telco side, of course, we would like to be very much part of helping and building the infrastructure in this region, and we think it's important that we're active and that we help creating new and innovative services for the citizens. And here, I'm not only talking about the old infrastructure where we have speak, we have text, we have data usage. It's actually more into becoming platforms and to be more part of the ecosystems together with the internet players that we see are actually building platforms on the internet. So from our side, we think we should, of course, create the infrastructure, but we're also trying to move into actually creating platforms that hopefully can help all the countries. And why is this important? That's actually important because the latest McKinsey study on the region from 2016 showed that if you have 10% increase in mobile penetration, you would actually get an increase in GDP in countries. So they estimated a 10% increase in mobile penetration would actually create 1.1 raise in GDP for Tunisia, 1.2 for Jordan, 1.4 for Morocco. And I think this is interesting to see how data and use of communication can actually increase GDPs in countries. So from a telco side, what do we think is important when we look at data? Coming from Europe, that has a heavy regulation on data. We have the General Data Protection Regulation, which is actually a horizontal regulation that will cover everything, and that will be enforced next May. We see that there is very much focus on protecting data, which is important. So we find that trust is important here. If we don't have the trust of the end users, we're not going to have the data, and we're not going to actually boost the digital economy. Then people will be afraid of using the services instead of being willing to use it. But from our side, we also see that Europe is actually also having an e-privacy regulation, which is sector-specific, which is actually creating more strict rules on the telcos. And we find that this will actually create a barrier for the telcos to give more services to the citizens. Here, I'm not talking about confidentiality, because I think this is key in every service of communication. It has to be confidential. But I'm looking into what can we do with location data, for example. A lot of telcos are not allowed, the telcos in Europe are not allowed to use the location data in the same way as the internet players. So you would have Google Maps that can use the service, but telcos cannot. And from why is this important also for the Middle East and North Africa? Well, it's important because this will give less consumer choices and less innovations if you create rules that restrict the telcos. But that being said, I'm still getting back to, if we don't have the trust, if we don't have the protection of the users' data, this will be worth nothing, because without this protection, I think there will be no use of the services. And I think if we create systems that safeguards, that actually, what we have in Europe with the GDPR, you give your consent to the use of data. And that's an important point. You know what the data is used for. So transparency again. I heard ICANN in the report said transparent rules is important. And I think that is also key when you talk about the use of data. Transparency is key here. We have members of ETNO who are actually creating platforms that will enhance the transparency of what your data is used for. Telefonica has Aura, their platform that actually creates these services. So I see they're there. And I find that if we can actually push for transparent use of data, that will be important. I also heard my fellow panel speaker talking about e-skills, and I think this is also important. So what will we use the data for? If I look at how it's used in Europe, it's used for a lot of data is used for better traffic. It's used for better public service, better traffic also in the public transportation. We use it also for studying health issues. You can actually learn a lot from big data in relation to health. And for smart cities, this is also key. So data is actually going to be the driver of innovation in many countries. So if we don't have Middle East also being part of this, everyone, of course, will lag behind. So I think data is important for all of us. Data goes with infrastructure. So from infrastructure side, we as telcos, of course, welcome very much if we have the right investment environment for infrastructure investments. Here, infrastructure competition is important. And so getting back to where I started, we as telcos think data is the new oil. We believe it's important for all regions of the world. And we very much will like to be a part of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lisa. And you have touched on about very hot topics these days, which is the GDPR and e-privacy. And we want to understand about it later on in the question and answer about the impact of these regulations on the Middle East and the other countries as well. Moving forward, I would go to Ms. Inaz from an educational perspective. She'll be presenting her slides about that. Floors are yours.
Thank you very much, Ali. Thank you very much, colleagues. Good morning, everyone. So, as I said, I am a teacher at the Ministry of Education in Tunisia. So we don't really have a national strategy for the ICT implementation in education, but we do have some personal and organizational incentives, like myself and my colleagues, like teachers of English and of technologies. So today I'll be talking to you about ICT implementation in Tunisian education and pathways to sustainable digital economies. Next slide, please. So first, I'll be talking about creating a learner generation. Next. So this is the figure which is really that I find really interesting. So education for a new global reality. So by 2050, half of today's jobs will be replaced by technologies. This number is quite scary and quite interesting at the same time, and I'll be explaining why. New jobs will demand different and higher level skills. The population of Africa, since I am from Africa, Tunisia, Northern Africa, the population of Africa will double to 2 billion. Half will be young people. And unless education systems can respond, a major shortage of skilled workers will stunt the global economy. Up to a quarter of the population could still live in extreme poverty, and income inequality will increase. Next, please. Facts. So up to half of today's jobs, around 2 billion, are at high risk of disappearing. New technologies, unfortunately, risk not to create new jobs at anything like the scale they are eradicating them, and demand of high-level skills will grow. Next, please. So those with high internet literacy skills, capacity to adapt to change, ability to access to technology, will expect an even greater share of earnings. Thank you. Next, please. So the expectations would be to provide resources and willingness to harness new technology, urging a commitment from policy and decision makers to every child, providing common training for teachers to teach 21st century skills. So this is a big issue right now in Tunisia because, as I said, the Ministry of Education doesn't really have a national strategy. So that's why we are trying to have try online courses, and then we have those who manage to have international training at, like myself, I had the chance to have training in the United States. So we give trainings to other teachers. So this is what is happening right now. Also, we need to create indexes and indicators to assess overall performance of educational institutions because, for example, in Tunisia, we don't really have international standards for teaching English, for teaching technologies, maths, etc. And also raising pupils' awareness about their privacy rights and data protection. And this is the crux of this workshop. Next, please. So pathways from ICT implementation in education to sustainable digital economies in the MENA region. Next, please. So as teachers, we have noticed that ICT has restored curiosity to education. And our students, they are more keen on swiping a page or on their phone than opening a book. So it brings sounds and movement to static textbooks. It helps overcome physical and geographical barriers, especially like, for example, myself, I teach at a very rural and remote area in Tunisia. And it eliminates artificial boundaries and promotes an environment of global citizenship. Next, please. Okay, this is also a very interesting figure. So education is the smartest investment in terms of benefit-cost ratios. For example, $1 invested in an additional year of schooling generates $10 in benefits in low-income countries. Some might ask, what is $10? Well, $10 in some developing countries like Tunisia is quite an interesting amount of money. Next, please. So what I would recommend personally, what we are recommending as teachers, is to invent an ICT implementation and education as a value chain. Because it would deliver more technology-literate graduates. It would sustain the digital economy mechanisms that have been very strong and did not fail amid the recent economic crisis that we had in the MENA region and all the revolutions that we had. It would deliver new business opportunities, especially. Next, please. We would recommendations, raising public awareness. We have been to some extent successful at this in Tunisia through some NGOs. I am still repeating myself maybe that we don't really have a national strategy. So we are trying to push for it through the Ministry of Education, but it is slow, but it's coming. Let's wish for the best. So raising public awareness. Raising pupils' awareness about their privacy rights and data protection through national and local campaigns. So we tried to raise because our students are very fun and keen on using Facebook. So we try to raise their awareness about how much data and information they are given about themselves, which is really dangerous, how much they are giving to Facebook and to all the apps they are using. We hoped that it can involve the youth and be as multi-stakeholder as possible. We are asking for the policy foundation and to put this on the government agenda. Next, please. The government also should have some responsibility in the digital economy, for example, to help in overcoming the financial and regulatory risks in starting up new businesses, creating new infrastructures, technical side, creating appropriate skills in developing practices, training the students, not only the students and pupils, because we are really asking for training of pupils at high school and also at primary school, so that they know about their data and their privacy rights as soon as possible and as early as possible. And we also are asking for a training of teachers to know as much as possible about data protection. And last but not least, investing in education as a value chain, because it will pay off. Next, please. So this is our baby in Tunisia. It's called Smart Tunisia. And it is a huge national project, so it aims at creating value in the field of digital economy. Smart Tunisia, the Tunisian government has allocated more than 1,500 million euros in grants to encourage international operators to come and invest in Tunisia. It aims at leveraging Tunisia as talent hub for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. Its main focus is offshoring, outsourcing, and promotion. And Smart Tunisia is an initiative of the National Strategic Plan, Tunisia Digital 2018. And that's all for me now, and I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Inas, and great initiatives, although it goes outside the government initiative or strategy, but it's coming from a personal and a group initiative, which I think it will fly and it will succeed. Thanks a lot. Floor is to Mr. Satish Babu from a technical perspective for data in the new oil. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ali. I am Satish Babu, and I chair the APRELO. Maybe I should share for a minute the reasons why this workshop was kind of conceived of. We found that the Middle East has made a very dramatic turnaround from the very pessimistic prognosis as late as 2011 and 12, when people said the Middle East is in for trouble because the economic slowdown is going to impact the region. We find that by 2016, there's not only a kind of complete turnaround, the economies have actually bounced back, which we thought was extremely interesting. The resilience that the region has shown has been really remarkable. And we thought we should highlight this because we felt that the prime enabler in this journey was the internet. So that is the reason why we thought we should highlight this. Now, if you look at the further development of the Middle East, we see that the governments have been quite proactive in using the latest technologies. My friend mentioned blockchain. Actually, Dubai has announced a cryptocurrency called Mcash sometime back. But not just that. The cryptocurrency itself is for maybe smoothing out transactions. But they have actually decided to go in for a 100% blockchain-based governance model by 2020, which is a very ambitious target, which I'm not sure whether they're going to achieve this, but they have stated it upfront, and it's all over the media, that the government of UAE is trying for this. Now, if they can do that, they'll be one of the first governments in the world, one of the earliest to do this. So we see that the free flow of data is really the engine that keeps the economies alive. We heard about GDPR and the whole issue of privacy coming out. Some of the not so positive aspects of data would be, one is privacy, and all of us are concerned about privacy. We are in Europe right now, and Europe has shown the rest of the world how to deal with privacy, although some things are yet not very clear as to how this is going to unfold as we go forward. But the steps have been taken, and the rest of the world is watching. At the same time, you also are in the world of IoT, and we have billions of these devices which are monitoring all kinds of things about us without any permission from us. So this gives rise to issues about how can data be generated on me without my permission. So those aspects are also kind of live. But also most important perhaps is the fact that the internet giants, whether it's Facebook or Google, they're making billions of dollars in revenue based on user data. Now users don't get to see any of this. They don't ask us, but they're actually making money off us. So this is, now we're not even getting into the role of governments. Now in the Middle East, the governments have played a very proactive role. But we do not know what has been the impact on individuals. In the short run, this is not very clear. In the longer term, this is going to become an issue as the data is collected across populations. So Ali tells me that we're running short of time, so I'm winding up here. I would just like to say that the free flow of data has proven itself to be one of the great enablers of regional development. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Satish. And it's very much a great information. I would tell you something about UAE when they said they will go 100% government, blockchain, and cryptocurrency. They will go. They will do it. I'll give the floor now to Ms. Hanan to introduce herself and go ahead with her part of the workshop, please.
Thank you, Ali. My name is Hanan Boujami. I'm from Morocco, and I'm an independent senior tech policy advisor. I don't want to dwell on what the colleagues mentioned previously. I just want to focus on 3 points. And with regards to the role of data in driving digital economy and economy in general, in the context of the Middle East, we all know it's important, but I think we were a little bit late joining the party. And that meant we have to tag along with whatever is available. I will not speak about the economic dimensions or the civil society perspective on the issue, but I will specifically speak about the recent meeting that was held in Argentina. It's organized by WTO, and I'm not sure if you're aware of the proceedings, but governments met to negotiate a digital trade agreement. I think we're definitely left behind because I doubt that there was representation from the government level from the Middle East in this meeting, where we see a specific trend of negotiations. Now, we don't know the details about the trade agreement because I know from the reports that there was no consensus of what should happen. I think governments of the Middle East should be better positioned to be able to negotiate these kinds of agreements at the global level. Why? Because we don't want to play the role of followers. We want to be able to negotiate a deal that feeds into the interests of people in the Middle East. So I think this is an important point. Now, we know the main players in this field are the tech giants, the tech companies, and I think we need to open channels of discussions with these companies as as regional consumers, so we can highlight our interests in having a platform or having a data-powered economy that feeds into our interests. As you can hear, from my colleagues, there is a lot of enthusiasm about new technologies and new kind of trends of tech in general. So UAE is ready to adopt blockchain, and I'm sure other countries will follow. It's just, I think we are not good yet at the level of negotiating at the policy level. And I think if we leave these opportunities, I think we will definitely play catch up, constantly with this type of agreement. So the point, the takeaway from these kinds of meetings is that we need to position ourselves better to be able to lead the discussion that represents the interests of the consumer at the local level and the regional level. We want, the new push for any digital trade agreement to feed into the interests of public interest in general. And I think we should definitely fight the tech giant monopolies in terms of collecting our data without our consent sometimes. And even without that, we don't have other alternatives. And it's just for you to know, I mean, having the data is basically helping these companies shape their products. And that means the better information they have about the consumers, the better the product is customized to the need of the clients. I wish we're in a position where we're at the forefront of these innovations, so we are in full control of the products which make sense to us. But I obviously value the importance of being exposed, internationally and having some kind of alignment with what's happening at the global level. It's just in terms of products, I think our market should be protected from, the floods of products that are basically maybe engineered or customized for a global consumer. So this is what companies like Facebook, Google are doing. They do not customize their products unless they are being hindered by government regulations. So we speak about regulations a lot, but we don't speak about their marketing strategy, about how they make their own products, whether they're feasible, whether they're good for our markets. I think we need to take the discussion to that level, not focus always on regulation, but also to be able to talk to these companies how they actually engineer their algorithm to customize a product that is present and available for the whole world. It might not be for the benefit for other regions. And thank you.
Thanks a lot, Hanan. And I will hand over to Liana to look into our remote speakers, please.
Thank you, Ali. We do have a presenter, please, George Sebastião. He will be presenting a speech. Can we please start that? George, can you hear us?
Okay. Yes, I can hear you. Can
you speak louder, please?
Yes,
we can see you.
I'm trying. Can you hear me now better?
Not that much. A little bit louder.
Okay, I'm trying. So I am muted. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
I think I can share maybe the PowerPoint presentation. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present. Thanks, Dr. Ali, for the invitation. Do you see the presentation on the screen now?
Yes, we can see your presentation. Please go ahead, George.
Oh, okay, please. Sure. Okay. So in the next few minutes, I'm just going to give you a little bit of an appreciation about data as the new oil from a practical and framework architecture perspective. So first thing that is important, I think data is driving the new economy, and it really matters a lot the type of company that you are, because you need to make this necessary transformation. Obviously, you have to be the likes of companies like Uber or Airbnb that have become pretty much virtual companies. But to be data-driven does not necessarily mean you're a pure virtual company. We have other ones, like, for example, Tesla, which are not virtual companies, but are making data a key element of their entire strategy. And there's some that are hybrids somewhere between, like LinkedIn and so on. In order for us to take advantage of this framework, I think there's many elements that need to be addressed. I think we need to understand the challenges, the scope. We need to put an overall way of validating how we bring this to our organizations, pilot, and much more important than that, actually have a structure that is capable of scaling it up as much as possible. In order for us to be able to do that, we need to address four major elements. One is the collection, sensing, or capturing of the data. Second element is obviously normalizing this data and moving it to a platform where we can use it, store it, analyze it. And it's quite interesting because the previous presenters were talking about artificial intelligence. We can look at it as an evolution that is extremely important. And more important than that is the actions that we take and how fast we take these actions on this data that will actually make the difference in itself. So how do we go about capturing this data? I mean, we are familiar with the traditional method, but obviously the users are becoming an important part of that, whether we use QR codes, we use fancy new headsets that actually provide translation, drones, or even satellites with the new accessibility of these meanings of capture, especially what we call microsatellites are changing the whole face of how we capture and we use data in the future. Obviously, when we talk about IoT or IIoT or IoE, Internet of Everything, we're really trying to put an IP address on pretty much everything that makes our lives, whether it happens to be at home, at work, or in an industrialized or even transportation, medical, or other fields as we see. So there's a lot of vertical work that is being done in these areas. To go to the next thing, since we're capturing a lot more large amounts of data, how we transport this data becomes extremely important. Yes, we're familiar with cable means of transporting this data, fiber, and others, but obviously we need to simplify how we go about transporting this data. So new advancements, especially in the area of 5G and narrowband OIT, will make a big difference because it will simplify how we actually capture this data directly from the sensors, meaning that we could, for example, put a parking sensor somewhere, and this sensor will live for a period as long as 5 to 7 years, or even much more. Obviously, since the data is much larger, and we saw some of the earlier presenters talk about zettabytes, of course, we have gone through a whole bunch of revolutions, but I think the biggest revolution that is happening in data storage is that everything is pretty much becoming solid state. Even more important, we have moved away from deleting data. We simply don't worry about it. We keep as much data as possible. So the cloud has actually enabled us to see the data as something completely new, as a different approach. How to go about processing it? In our cloud environments, we have now massive amounts of cloud capability. We're actually building very large grid computers. One of the early presenters talked about blockchain. What is blockchain? It's a very large grid computer that enables us to have access to that power. Some of it is obviously computing new numbers, but it goes much beyond that, because with the advent of things like smart contracts, we have now the capability to have access to that computing capabilities as well on the cloud, not just through the traditional cloud mechanisms that we saw in the past. But data only becomes useful when we actually visualize it in something that is practical to our everyday lives. So I think we need to do a lot of work on what I call the visualization or the usability of that data by the traditional users. And obviously, since we're talking about many participants from many countries from all over the world, each different user has different capabilities and different needs. And we need to cater to this to make this data fully accessible in a visual way. So when we take all these elements of adding value to this new oil, we really need to address all of this to combine together. So the sensing simplifies our complexity of collecting this data. By connecting all these things together in a much more virtualized way, we introduce much greater degrees of agility. AI and big data enables us to introduce new and continuous learning. But last important aspect is actually how we do with this data. So being able to introduce things like multimodal response to this data becomes extremely important and extremely valuable. But I think to leave with you, you can say a call of action as a result of this data new oil. That really means you need to do not just digital transformation as we saw it in the past, is how we transform based on this innovation associated with data. So we need to look at new ways to reshape our organizations to actually take the advantage of this new data approach. That's my 8 to 10 minutes with you. Hopefully you enjoyed, and now we leave the floor for some questions. Thank you.
Thank you, George. We will keep the question for a later period when all speakers have finished their speeches. Thank you very much for your participation. And now we will give the floor to our next, the last speaker. Please, Nasrat. We're giving the floor to you. But please take into mind that we're running out of time, and we will give you 2 or 3 minutes. Thank you.
Can you guys hear me?
Sorry? Yes. Yes.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm Khalid. I'm going to cut this a little shorter, more than I expected, but I think I'll just build up on the points that were made previously, and I'll just bring down some of my experiences in Afghanistan to give out another perspective from a fragile and conflict-affected state perspective, which is one thing that has been missing in discussion today. The question was asked on how we can move ahead as a region and get out of this loop of giving out our data to the joint. In other words, how we get to a point where we can enhance our economy by using our own products. From a technology perspective, I think one question to be asked is, what is our mission when we make these products? The mission is to look at problems and provide a solution, not to look at the problem in another space and compare that to a solution in our region or in our country. Now, disruptive technologies should be used as and when received. I wouldn't wait for the likes of blockchain, AI, and IoT to be implemented elsewhere, and that to be brought in back to the region and then be used to get the data, which gives us back, which pretty much gets us back to the same square. Now, with the same, with these new technologies, we have an opportunity to be able to jump into it, make solutions that are made for our own region, to be able to control the data in the future and be able to translate that into different answers that we would be that we could further build on in the future. And then again, as a region, a digital strategy, if we are going to look at, it should be bigger than an ICT strategy. The biggest misconception in our region is the fact that a digital strategy is never a strategy that includes other areas out of the ICT strategy. In that sense, what I mean is the ICT strategy gets you back to the connections, the internet, and the technical stuff, but it gets you what we usually leave behind the bigger sense of how a digital strategy is connected to the country's economy and how we drive it to the future. And then from both economic and technological perspective, one of the downfalls of where we are is the fact that we do not have a lot of local content, and the products do not have a local context to it. I would say that could be used in a positive way to be able to translate this problem of not having the local context and the local content in the products that we use, but rather design new products and new systems with a touch of local context and content, which we could use ourselves to be able to free ourselves from this limited amount of data that we have as a region. And then countries like Afghanistan and others that pretty much do not have any data. So with that, then again, a few other problems as of right now that I'll give you as an example of Afghanistan is, for example, we do not have a postal delivery service where the whole city is not mapped. There is no zip code, there is no addressing. So a problem like that cannot be solved by a tech giant. The likes of Google and the likes of Facebook have never been able to come there and solve that problem. So at this point, if I can go ahead as an Afghan and solve that problem, it gives me the opportunity to take over the whole country and get the data to be used in the future as something that we own as the country. And the same goes on for the region for a lot of online banking systems that we have, rather than waiting for the types of future Visas and MasterCards. Why don't we go ahead and work on blockchain solutions that could be used locally once we own them? That's it. Open to questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nasrat, for your participation and your intervention. Now I will give the floor back to you, Ali, to continue. We have finished with our remote participants. Thank you.
Thank you, Liana, and thanks for all the participants, the remote and the attendees here on the panel. I would like to open the floor for the question and answers, and please, whoever is like to raise his questions, go ahead. Tijani, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this panel. I think I noticed that in this IGF there is a lot of sessions where the issue of data is addressed. I think that we are a little bit late to address this issue because it is very important. It is our life. It is our future. I agree with you, Ali, that we are not generating a lot of interesting data, but we are generating a lot of data that are not interesting for us. They are interesting for the others, and this is very dangerous for us. The most important thing in this issue is the use of this data, in my point of view, because in most of the cases, those data are used against our will. We don't even know that they are used, and yet they are. And unfortunately, they are not used for the public interest always. Sometimes they are for researchers, medical researchers, for social, economic researchers, etc. But for other cases, and most of the cases, they are used for interest, for political interest, or for commercial interest. And this is a pity, in my point of view. I think that it is a chance that the European community decided to adopt this new regulation, because this will give the European people, at least, more protection for their data. And I think this regulation will impact every user of Internet, because, as you know, there is an extension of the scope of the application of the GDPR out of Europe. Means that even companies, not European companies, that are serving the European people have to comply with the GDPR. I think that there is another kind of data that we didn't speak about, which is the data related to the domain name system, the WS and the RDS, etc. These data also are a problem, and the problem wasn't solved since the inception of Internet. And I hope this, with the GDPR, we will find a quick solution, because we don't have choices not to have these solutions. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tijani. And I would like also to add into this, like Walid said, that we are generating data, but it's not being used locally. Hanan said that we are a bit late to this. Ms. Lisa says about the report from McKinsey that shows there's a good potential of growth in the Middle East. So what actions we need to take? If I maybe throw this question to the panelists, like whoever it wants to take that one, please comment to it. Dr. Walid, if you would like to give our Bahar, yeah, please.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I don't want to repeat myself, but I think there are, several areas that, need some work, and, whether on the infrastructure part, still a lot of work to be done there, on applications, on services, still also much to be done, developing digital skills. And again, digital skills are not only about professional programs and training. It needs to start at the very early stages, from the basic education, to include and to embed technology into education. And then the fourth area is the policy and regulatory frameworks. Now, this is not new. I mean, we've been saying the same thing more and more again. I think what is needed is to take a holistic approach towards all these areas, to include all stakeholders in this process, governments, private sector, civil society, and so forth, to have the right set of actions in each and every area of those.
Yeah. If I may also add, I'd like to note that education is not necessarily targeted to those who are seen to be less or, for example, general public. Education can also be for officials, for government policymakers, because they sometimes, I don't know, it's not maybe arrogance, but they are not used to be told that you do not know how technology works. So instead of openly saying, I don't know how it works, they often ignore or brush it off, leading to policies that are incompatible, that do not actually work. They are not possible to implement. And that's been done not only in the MENA region, but other countries as well. Additionally, there is a lack of political will and understanding that data can sometimes be powerful if it's open, if it's transparent. So many organizations, including, for example, development agencies and ministries, do not have their data open for public scrutiny. So transparency, lack of it, leads to corruption and leads to lack of accountability later on. And so, as referred to, multi-stakeholder or a multi-stakeholder approach requires that not only does government think of its own interests, also think of what the public's interest is, and that would include openness to having this data available not only in, let's say, images or PDF files, but in a machine extractable way, so that different tools can be used to extract this data and analyze it automatically instead of manually, leading to understanding of the implications of this data. And that would reveal many findings that would help fine-tune economies, fine-tune processes, and enable savings in budgets.
I think transparency and awareness is everything. And if we want to actually push for the data economy, these are two very important principles that needs to be in place. And saying that, I know that in Estonia, they have a system where you actually can see who are pulling out your data from the public side. And that's, for me, is a strong tool. So by having the government being a good example itself would actually be, for me, an enabler of how to deal with this. And that being said, I think going back to the regulation, which I also think is important here, horizontal regulation is key because we have services that are converging. If you go into being more sector specific, you might target someone and you will kill their innovation part. So I think if you're looking at regulation, make it horizontal and lead by example from governments. They can do a lot. And create, I really like the idea of embed this into also the educational systems, because this is where you create the spurs of innovation and the users will be educated and made aware.
Thank you. I have the gentleman there have a question. Please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Nikhil Pawa. I'm from the Internet Freedom Foundation. I'm from a country that's currently looking at collecting and generating large amounts of data on citizens as a means of offering better services, but we also face the problem of consent being forced on us when it comes to data collection. So I would oppose the characterization of data as oil, because my data is not your resource. Right? And I think we need to look at it from a rights perspective as much as we look at it from a markets perspective, because there is a significant failure and a global market failure when it comes to data protection. And when we talk about corporations like Google, Facebook collecting data, and about we're also talking about a situation where there's not been enough control over this entire collection of data, because quite often data is collected without context or control. Once consent is given, it's given forever, and consent is broken. So I'm from a country where consent is being forced at this point in time, and we're fighting a battle to ensure that people have the right for consent. So when we talk about governments and people using data, we need to look at it from a rights perspective very, very importantly. We need to give users more control and treat privacy as a right and not as a property for trading. We need to make sure that our data is not weaponized and used against us, which is a challenge that governments are also facing. So I would look at data protection from the perspective of having standards from a rights perspective when it comes to data generation, over which often many of us users don't have control. Data collection, storage, transmission, processing and sharing, because I think we have to move towards a direction where we address this market failure and go back to rights. Thank you.
Thank you. I think, Hannah, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I 100% agree. That's the direction we should take shouldn't really be product-oriented. We should look at the human rights approach. And I think the solution to that is to have very strong data protection mechanisms. It's true regulation lagged behind, catching up with what's going on, because before your government decided to collect data to improve services, the excuse, I think companies did that before, government. So it's like you already have an example that proved to be very useful, to know more about people. So governments, I think, are just following what companies already did. So for citizens to, to have rights, you need to push for data protection laws and legal mechanisms which actually, protect your right as an end consumer. Now, we all understand that advocating for rights at the local level for a topic like, the internet or anything tech-based might not be like a strategic approach. You need to build coalition at the regional level, like in your region as well, to have, the necessary mechanisms, the legal mechanisms in place, so you can, lead the conversation forward with your government. I think the European Union presents a very good example of how they actually approach. It's true we were all lagging behind catching up with what companies did, but I'm sure you heard of the newly kind of launched GDPR, so General Data Protection Regulation, which will be reinforced next year, I think May 2018, and everybody in Europe is fretting about that, including companies. I'm sure you saw on your feeds on Facebook, on Twitter, that everybody is organizing a training on GDPR, because these people at the European Commission are very serious about their job, and if they prepare a text, everybody is going to be bound by this legal text, which means the data of people should be protected and all companies should comply with that. This is the only way out, for you. I think you're from India. And I think Tunisia is having the same issues as well with your ID system and so on. So it's very important to advocate for rights at the local level, but it's very also crucial, in my opinion, to carve the road towards having a legal mechanism that protects end consumers.
Thanks, Hanan. I have a question, sir, please.
Yes, it's a comment and a question. Janice Richardson, with my colleague Elizabeth Milovidov, we are working for the Council of Europe hand in hand with the Moroccan government. Over the past year, we have developed an extensive 5-pillar plan for the integration of technology, but also data collection, data protection, etc. And there are a couple of points that we have picked up here. One very important area was to bring all of the ministries, civil society, education, etc., into a task force to take ownership of moving forward. The reason for this, we think that very often countries in the MENA region are picking up, as we've had so much discussion about the GDPR, and there are many mixed feelings about this, but why pick up on what's happening in Europe? So one of the important pillars is an innovation pillar with new university courses so that innovation can happen from within the country. Why use the tools that exist already and the content which is not necessarily adapted to the way of life in the MENA region? Another area that we have noticed, yes, awareness raising is good, but this really doesn't count for anything unless there is a joined-up approach where citizens become aware of the legal framework, but there are also places places where they can report, and there's a value chain where their reports can go right through to the end, to prosecution if necessary. What we've picked up and what we are hoping to improve also is the societal element. The whole society needs to be involved in this transformation, from parents and from the very remotest regions. And I think that the force of Europe is this collaboration, this cooperation, and we would really love to see this and even see other countries looking at what's been developed in Morocco for the past year, which is a very, very extensive program which will be implemented over the coming 3 years. Not so many questions, but I think it's food for thought. Thank you.
Sorry. Thanks a lot. It is very much fruitful and to know about such informations. And I'm running out of time. We have almost 4 minutes. Please go ahead.
This is Wale Bakari, Uralu Secretariat. Yes, my comment really is about the what we have been discussing so far. And the very first thing I want to talk about is about the people talking about Facebook, Twitter, Google. Yes, that is all what we wanted. We wanted innovation, and we got them. So we need to just play by the rules and follow what they have. But it's now left for individuals. So what can we take? So what is our take-home from these innovations? Then that comes to the point of developing a strategy. What kind of strategic plan do we have to put in place as an individual, as an organization, as a government, that we need to take from the... when we are talking about data, we are living in a data-centric modern world now. That is one point we need to understand. It's no longer a big data. It's a data world. We have IoT coming and smart things. That is one point from the strategic point of view. Then the second, important thing that I think we need to look at is about innovations. We need to democratize innovations in terms of adopting a kind of multi-stakeholderism that have been in place. We need to, really practicalize this from the end users to the manufacturers, to the producers, to the, we need to have this democratization in place where everybody will benefit, And also, if government is trying to say, yes, we have a data protection in place, so what will that impede, the emerging innovations? These are the things we need to do. So we need to look at this, these key elements in terms of addressing what, why, and how the data is going to be implemented and going to be used continuously. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Tijani, if it is half a minute, then I will give you the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. Everyone is speaking about the legal data protection. Yes, we need it. It is absolutely needed. But it is not the only way to protect our data. First of all, there is no absolute hermetic data protection. But we can we can have the best data protection if we use all the tools. And one of the tools is the technical tools, encryption, etc. Second is the legal tools. And the third and the most important, in my point of view, is the behavior of the user. Because users are behaving as if they want to put their life on the internet without any kind of awareness that everything is used. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tijani. I think we are on time. I would like to thank my speakers and the panelists here. I would like to thank the remote participation and remote speakers and the attendees and the help from the technical team from the IGF. Thank you very much. And that's it.